the name of the living God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to be here with you today, especially thrilled to be united with my good friend Betty, whom we haven't seen in quite a while. And I send greetings from our executive director, the Reverend David Ryder. And thank you for having me. The Son of God, as we have heard over and over again, came not to be served, but to serve. This also sheds a new light into our world. Just as Jesus went about healing and making those on the fringes visible, so too we are called to do the same. We are called to be light bearers in this world. We are called to care for the alien, the strangers of this world, those that society would have us ignore. This is our mandate. It is all of our mandates, and of course is the underpinning of the work of Series Church Institute. 90% of everything that we use, all the stuff of our lives, from the clothes we wear to the food we eat, from iPods to lawnmowers, all comes through our courts on the backs of seafarers who are part of the unseen, the invisible ones, people that sacrifice a lot, but do it to keep their families from bankruptcy. So there are four main components of what our ministry is and the work of SCI. Pastoral care, maritime education, law and advocacy, and our Christmas at sea. We began as an advocate for the seafarers back in the early 1800s. When we were on Lower Manhattan, there was a group of concerned citizens at Trinity Southport. And their husbands and brothers and nephews would go down to the battery and get plied with alcohol by these unscrupulous shipping people. And literally shanghai them, knock them over the head, drag them on board ship. And when they came to, they had two choices: to work as a slave labor on board ship, or jump and hope that they can make it to the land twice. Usually they didn't, they drowned. So a group of people got together, and that is how we got started. That was our founding mandate, that we look after for seafarers and their rights. And that was in 1848, and we were incorporated. So since then, we have been boarding ships and going up the gangways, and we go visit all the crew members, or most of them, if we can. Of course, the crux and the soul of what we do is pastoral care. So some of the ratings, not the officers, the ratings sometimes are on board 6 to 9, even 12 months at a time without seeing their families. So you can only imagine the kind of stress that puts not only on the seafarer, but for their families who wait for their safe return home. The seafarers are strangers when they go from port to port to port. And then when they get home after 9 months, they're a stranger at home. The dynamics of their family have changed in that amount of time. Perhaps a new child has been born and they weren't there for the birth. Perhaps when they left, the child was a baby and now is a toddler. And even though they may Skype every once in a while, there's a strange man that's coming into your house and they start to cry. And this is Dad, he's come home. So seafarer stays home for 2 months, sometimes 3 months. They get readjusted and acclimated and get back into a routine, and then it's time for the seafarer to leave home and go back on board ship. And so the cycle starts all over again. So it's kind of difficult. So we go on board as chaplains, and with a set of ears, a new set of ears, and we never know what we're going to find when we get up that gangway. All kinds of things could occur. We work very closely with our maritime attorney, Douglas Stevenson, and he is our they must buy their own bottled water for drinking. Or I go on board and I hear that there isn't enough food, or there's not a variety of food, a good variety of food for a healthy diet. Or I've gone on board and sometimes there's a medical condition that has not been properly addressed. So there are these various circumstances where then we would call our attorney if the seeker wants to pursue this, and we try to effect a reconciliation amongst ourselves. If that doesn't work, Douglas will call the shipping company and the owners to put more pressure on to try and alleviate the conditions. I remember one time I went on board ship and the fitter in the engine department had a terrible accident. He had mangled his index finger in machinery, and it got crushed and needed reconstructive surgery. They were 2 weeks out at sea before they would get to port. So the chief officer, and part of the tip of it his finger had come almost off, it was dangling by threads. The chief officer actually tried to sew this thing back on. They did have Novocaine and some sort of anesthesia. And wrapped it up and put some topical antibiotic ointment on it. But when the knife saw it, it was black, and it was getting blacker. And we were afraid gangrene was going to set in. Well, it had. But the seafarer didn't have a visa, so he couldn't get off the ship. And the shipping company did not want to put out the price of having 2 armed guards escort him to a medical facility. So a physician came on board, and she looked at it, and she said, he's got to be repatriated immediately. And then 5 hours later, the company had probably bribed this physician, I don't know. But they said, well, he can be repatriated in Panama. Panama was 2 weeks away. He didn't have that kind of time to wait. So, of course, I called Doug and I said, we've got to do something for this guy. And the captain took me aside and said, please do something for him. He's such a faithful worker. He's a good man. He does not deserve this kind of thing. So Douglas called the shipping company and the Coast Guard, and they finally got him. We couldn't set up, they were sailing in 4 hours after I had discovered this. But we did get him repatriated home from Philadelphia. So that was an important, our presence was very much an important part of that ship's well-being. Sometimes when we go on board, we've heard that at home someone has died and the seafarer cannot be there. Somebody's been diagnosed with cancer or has had a heart attack, all number of kinds of things, the fabric of life that we face day after day. But they're there by themselves and they can't be there with their families to lend support, or to grieve with them, or to mourn with them, or to comfort them. So they often ask us for prayers on behalf of their families. Sometimes they want anointing, we do that. It's very much a ministry of presence. We go on and we take our lead from the seafarer. We don't have an agenda. And if you had an agenda, you'd leave it at the top of the gangway anyway, because it's not what I need, it's what they need. Another component of what we do, I've talked a little bit about law and advocacy, but Douglas is renowned in the world. He frequently goes before the United Nations as well as our Congress to address the rights of seafarers and to always work for bettering conditions for them. He also did a pilot project with a psychologist from Montefiore in New York on piracy. And while it has improved in some places, it's gotten worse in others, especially in places like Lagos, Nigeria, and surrounding areas. So they did a study for 3 years hostage until their release, and how also to help the seafarers, and also how to help the families who were waiting for them desperately to come home. Another part of what we do is maritime education. So we have centers, 2 blue water centers. One, ours, where I'm from Portsmouth and Elizabeth, New Jersey. Also Oakland, California, Paducah, Kentucky, on the confluence of the Ohio and Tennessee rivers, as well as Houston, Texas. And in Houston and Paducah, we have these simulators. And they're for the people, the towboat operators, who tow these massive barges, strings of barges, up and down the Mississippi and its tributaries. So we have these simulators. Let's say they're going to court, the river port of Pittsburgh. So they throw up Pittsburgh and the bridges and the abutments and all this other stuff, and they sit in a wheelhouse, a simulated wheelhouse, and it shudders like you really would on the river. And they also can throw in winds and water current, and then they have to navigate through all this stuff. So they do this to keep their license current, or if they want to upgrade the licenses, they have to have so many more hours on these simulators. There's also this thing called the fire field in Paducah, and it's we have this week-long course in managing crisis situations, and this course was developed by SEI and the Coast Guard. And so let's say they simulate a fire in the galley. So they would go about putting exercise on how to do and using best practices and how to take care of the calamity with greater efficiency. So this is a week-long project, and then at the end they get certified for that. And then the other big thing that we do is Christmas at Sea, and it's just magic. We have over 4,500 knitters that knit for us all across the United States and Alaska and Hawaii. And so when Christmas time comes, before that, we really start packing in about September. So we have these little ditty bags, and in these bags we put toiletries that people have collected for us, personal size, a hand-knit hat scarf set usually, some toiletries, toothbrush, toothpaste, playing cards, very important, puzzle books, things of that nature, candy, hard candy. So we put those in with the ditty bag and the hand knits, and then 10 of those bags goes into a big red Santa Claus bag. And captains take these bags and go up the gangways and deliver them to the seafarers on board. And their eyes just light up. Presents, Mom? And they just, if we didn't do it, they wouldn't get much for Christmas at all. So some of the companies do and some of them don't. But it's a riot. They frequently try them on, and they model them, and oh no, this color looks better on you. And then I like that one. It's really fun. Other times the chief officer or captain say, no, let's keep the Christmas presents for Christmas. I'll put them in the locker room and we'll have them Christmas Day so we can have a celebration. But it's just really touching, and it means so much to them. And it's a way of us being able to give back to these seafarers and to give them the dignity that they really deserve. That they're not just part of the cargo that the ship carries, they're important, and they are the soul of the ship. So, I'd like to share a story about 2 weeks ago. I was on board a ship. It was named the Hampton Dusseldorf. And I went on board and I could just feel some tension and some sadness, and they seemed to be subdued. And I thought, well, something's going on here. And nobody was saying much of anything. But I went to the crew's mess and sat down, and finally the chief officer came in and said, Chaplain, we need blessings. And I said, okay, 2 days ago, we had a death on board ship. And the body had been repatriated before they got into our port. And I said, well, what happened? And he was the cadet in the engine crew. And he had gone into some space that was not supposed to be in. He had no permission to go down there. And there was a passageway into the bowels of the ship. And as soon as you open a door to one of these passageways, alarms go off. I mean, you can't. I mean, they're loud. And despite the alarms, he went in. And there were very toxic fumes down there. And so he suffocated. And he died. And they found him there. So they don't know whether he went in on purpose or whether it was an accident. But really, of course, the crew was very shook up. So they wanted me to bless him, or bless the place where he died, and to bless where where his cabin was, and so forth, so on. So I did. I blessed where in the passageway. We didn't go into it, of course, but there, and I blessed his cabin, blessed the bridge, said some prayers along the way. It was about 3 o'clock on Friday afternoon, and then they looked at me and they said, "But Mom, we want a mass." And I said, "Okay." I said, "All right, I'll be back at 4. So I flew back to the center, put together a funeral service, and came back. And while I was preparing for the service, the cook had reassembled the mess room into a small chapel. I couldn't believe it. They had put a white linen cloth on the table, which became the altar. They found candles, and they put those on the altar and lit them. And then there were 18 of us. And they offered to do some readings, and hand out the readings, and then we broke bread. And the Spirit was definitely with us. You could just feel it. It was palpable. And afterwards, there was a sense of peace, and I think there was a sense of hope and healing, which was most important. That's a visit I'm not ever going to forget. I forgot to tell you one thing. Probably one of the most important things we do for the seafarers is to connect them with their families at home. So in this day and age, everybody has a cell phone. I have 2, for heaven's sake, so I added appendages. One is for work and my personal cell phone. They don't have cell phones, a lot of them. So we put those on board, and if they do have cell phones, we have SIM cards and top-off cards and you name it, so that they can call home and they can be reassured that things are all right. And we also, if the ship doesn't have internet, we can also bring modems on board and bring the internet on board for them, so that they can at least Skype and be with their families that way. So in closing, I'd like to say,